education. For example, we used to read Aristotle from the age of 7 to 13. And this oath here every day. And this oath says, I'm a Turk, I'm a righteous, I'm hardworking. My principle is to protect my minors, protect my elders, is to love my country, my nation much more than my own self, my ideal. My ideal is to rise, is to progress, all great Atatürk, the creator of our today. I swear that I will walk incessantly on the path you have paved, on the target you pointed out, on the ideal you have set. My existence shall be dedicated to Turkish existence. How happy is the one who says I'm a Turk? So every day, from the age 5 to 30, every day, morning and evening, all the students left this all together until the 2013. This state ideology was very much embedded in the thought that being Turk is an essential part of the existence of country's subject. There were and are requirements that every Turk had to dedicate their existence to Turkish progress and follow the path Atatürk paved. And this was and remained a path there was no place for Islam except in homes and mosques. This path was established on being secular, not being part of Iman. This ideology has been creating a kind of Muslim subjectivism that kept its religion in houses and mosques to chime with the claims of the separation of church and state of Western European countries. Particularly France, this new state-regulated Muslim subjectivity positioned in French law as superior to Islamic law under the name of progress and modernization, whilst the practicing and carrying any sign of Islam in public and more importantly in the political arena became a new sin for many of them.
Still last minute, please.
Okay. This newly constructed Muslim subject finds the niqab and hijab as outdated signs of backwardness, while in most of the case they are saying, Alhamdulillah, I am Muslim, but I'm against nikah and hijab. Sorry. So this kind of subjectivity played out the same inner conflict as the subject explained by Du Bois, that always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring oneself by the take of a word that looks on a new content and people. To summarize, when Islamic Western discourse established its foundations in Muslim majority countries, Du Bois' inner conflict observation finds itself in the acts of self-harm politically and culturally, cultivating an incoherence that can leave us at a point of lost place and identity. The example above demonstrates that Muslim can be Islamophobic because Islamophobia is not just an effect of 9/11 or simply consists of global norms, because anti-Muslim rhetoric has a long history embedded in the very foundations of Western epistemology and discourse. That is what makes it so potent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayşe KOTAN, for your presentation. I would like to give the floor to the audience. If you people have any questions, no, we would like to see at the last moment. Right? Okay, no problem. So our next speaker is Ms. Saima RASHID. She will talk about from Orientalism to Islamophobia, uncovering the historical roots of anti-Muslim sentiment in the West. The floor is yours, please.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It actually makes me wonder that a religion which starts its conversation with a prayer for peace has actually become a reason for global terrorism. Muslims, who only happen to be 1% of the world population, has got around 99% of the world population involved in representing, misrepresenting, stereotyping, labeling, and talking about it without even interacting with these Muslims. Why did I choose to talk about from Orientalism to Islamophobia? Just a little background story. I took a course called Middle Eastern Studies with one of my professors on the campus. And while we were talking about Orientalism in the Middle East, it got me thinking that when I listen to Islamophobic stories or what's happening in the West or in other countries in the world with Muslims, it's actually same as it's Orientalism that has set the stage for Islamophobia. It's not that Islamophobia appeared out of nowhere. It didn't come out of the blue. It had already a stage set by Westerners. And I hope I'm not trying to sound anti-Western here, but there was already a stage set for Islamophobia by the Orientalists in the past, which made it easy for the media to exaggerate it. Now I shall start my presentation. There are a couple of things that I would like to cover in my presentation. I'll talk about Orientalism, Islamophobia, clash of civilizations, why is actually Orientalism important to study Islamophobia, war on terror, and the war on terror actually being the terror trap. This is one of the quotes that I found on the internet without finding the author, but I really liked it. It says that despite the fact that Muslims comprise as only 1% of the world population, their very presence has become one of the defining issues of the populist era, dividing left and right in stark fashion. If we look at the political stage around the world right now, there are leftists, rightists, there are central parties, and every political party is actually running their politics around religion, and Islam is actually being the center of this this political drama. That if you are anti-Islam, you're like a right-wing party. If you are pro-Islam, you become like a slight left party, and if you're in the middle, you're a central party. So Islam has actually become the central stage for any Muslim as well as non-Muslim country in the world. Semantics of Orientalism. Of course, in the past presentations, we've already talked about the definitions, of course, we didn't talk about Orientalism, but we talked about Islamophobia. Pardon me for that. But I would like to talk about that, how Orientalism is actually portrayed by, Edward Said. He says that it's a lens which presents the West being more civilized than the East. It's a Western way of seeing the East from a colonial gaze, portraying people as, one, they're mysterious. Second, they're unique. Third, they're exotic. They're uncivilized. They're barbaric. They're primitive. They're savage. They're strange, and they're despotic. Now, we had a recent example in the Ukrainian war when Europe actually opened their door. European Union actually opened their doors for Ukrainians, saying that they actually look alike us. But when it was the case for Syrians, they were like, nah, they're like a little different. Like, they're not welcome here. But they didn't say the same for Ukrainians. Why were they? Because of blue eyes, blondes. They were blondes and all that. But they use this term that they look different from us, which is a very Orientalistic terminology. So we all know Edward Said. I was just speaking to Professor Ali Ganesh that when we study Edward Said, in the beginning, we don't understand him. And the second time, we understand like a little bit. But the third time, he starts making sense because it's really, really hard to read him. But when you do, you actually start making sense of things, that why the world is the way it is and why Muslims are treated the way they are in the world. So he's a renowned scholar. He wrote a dense volume on Orientalism. He also wrote a book on cultural imperialism. And he defines how practices like Orientalism enabled Europe to define itself as rightful rulers of the lands it sought to colonize. First, they created a sense of inferiority complex in Muslims. And second, of course, if you go by the psychology, they were ready to rule them. Because once, when you go into the behavioral psychology as well, it talks about that if you want to control somebody, you need to feel them lesser than you. So all these terms made Muslims feel lesser than the Westerners. It also constructed the binary like Orient and Occident. Orient is somebody who is uncivilized, barbaric, primitive, but an Occident is somebody who is progressive, civilized, and far ahead of Muslims. They constructed this uncivilized Orient as incapable of defining themselves, which Orientalists would actually justify by saying that we're defining and representing Muslims because Muslims don't have the capability to represent themselves. That's why we're doing the job for them. If you read the Orientalist narrative, they actually say that we did a favor for Muslims. It's not something we did bad. They actually own this narrative. Bernard Lewis, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. He's one of the Orientalists who critiqued the critique of Edward Said's critique on Orientalism. He says that he actually tries to say that it's Muslims who have Western phobia. We don't have Islamophobia. It's Muslims who are scared of West. Why? He claims that there's an anti-Western sentiment among Muslims because they're not as accomplished as West is. I actually read one of his essays called The Roots of Muslim Rage. It's published on The Atlantic. He argues that the anger and resentment many Muslims feel towards the West has a long history, rather than being a recent development. He believes that the West and the Muslim world have different worldviews and values, and it leads to clashes throughout the history. He also says that the decline of the Islamic world compared to the West has worsened resentment and feelings of inferiority among Muslims. He's actually putting it back on the Muslims, interestingly. He also believes that the factors like colonialism, creation of Israel, Western support for authoritarian regimes in the Muslim world, they have added to this Muslim anger. He says that anger is not a temporary issue, but a lasting one that needs to be addressed by policymakers and scholars. You can say that he's completely saying that he has actually created a counter to Islamophobia called the Western phobia, which is prevalent among Muslims, according to him. Now, Clash of Civilizations became quite famous, saying that, it was very futuristic. Samuel Huntington talks about that, as we evolve, people are going to have conflicts regarding their cultures, their religions. But when you actually go deep down into the book, you see that, like other Orientalists, he perceived Islamic unchanging and incompatible with other civilizations. He actually said that, they're all same, they're never going to change. So if they're never going to change, let's use them. Let's use them for what? He has picked up from Lewis in the classic kind of Orientalist gesture, saying that the notion that the civilizations are monolithic and homogeneous. And second, how, again, from Lewis, he assumes the unchanging character of the duality between us and them. So again, there's a binary. His view is that the West should actively promote its interests and values by exploiting conflicts and differences among the civilizations, such as Islamic and Confucian states. He prioritizes policy prescriptions over history or careful analysis of cultures. Even though he talked a lot about that cultures and religions, like the conflict in cultures and religions is going to rule in the future, but he has actually never studied about these cultures. So he's talking out of the blue, out of context, like Orientalists. He relies heavily on second and third-hand opinion, disregarding advances in our understanding of how cultures work, change, and can be understood. This is the visuals of the Orient, how Orientalists see the Orient. One, they're stuck in the desert. You will see it a lot in the Hollywood movies. And the snake charmers, and of course, the belly dancers. Now, defining Islamophobia, of course, it has been complicated a lot in terms of definitions, but I would rather talk about when the term Islamophobia actually came into existence. It gained widespread usage after the publication of Runnymede Trust report in 1997. I think it was talked about in the previous presentations as well. It defined Islamophobia as dread or hatred of Islam and fear or dislike of Muslims. It also argued that Islamophobia led to close views of Islam, viewing it as a monolithic adversary in need of combat and discipline. It's same basically like Orientalism. I don't see a difference here. Sorry, it looks a little, out of this place. But yeah, it happens when you get into the other laptop. So these were some of the findings of the Runnymede report. One is it's seen as monolithic block, static, unresponsive to change. It is seen as separate and other. They're seen as inferior to the West and barbaric, irrational, primitive, sexist, violent, aggressive, threatening, and supportive terrorism. Islam is also seen as a political ideology and is used for political or military advantage. What they're actually trying to say here is that it's just used for jihad. to convert people to Islam. Any criticisms that are made of the West by Islam are rejected out of hand. Hostility towards Islam is used to justify discriminatory practices towards Muslims and exclusion of Muslims from mainstream society. Also, any hostility to Muslims is seen as natural and normal by the Islamophobes. Well, these are two pictures. One is, I kind of could call it like male Islamophobia and the female Islamophobia, because gendered Islamophobia is pretty trending these days. Like hijabi women are also seen as terrorists. I'm sure it happens to, I don't know if it happens to people here, but when I go through the immigration, because I come from a minority Muslim minority country. So when I go through the immigration with the hijab, it's not taken as something happens. So we're seen as through the same lens as the males right now. So if you look at the terms that are labeled, that are actually pasted on his face, like terrorist, Muslim, Saddam, Al-Qaeda, fanatic, fundamentalist, Taliban, 9/11, a lot of it, suspect. So why is Orientalism important to study Islamophobia? Of course, when I was doing research about it, there's not a lot of research done about it, because people still say that these are two different concepts and we shouldn't try to mix them. I'm not trying to mix them either. What I'm trying to say is that it made Islamophobia pretty easy because there was already a stage set in the history. Like Orientalism had already left a legacy. I don't even think that Orientalism has left, because I think it's still there. So I think there should be an interdisciplinary thing here. They should be studied together to understand. So I think that it's important to study Islamophobia because it's a key aspect of how the West has historically viewed and represented the Muslim world. This legacy has contributed to a range of negative stereotypes and prejudices towards Muslims, such as the idea, of course, I talked about violent, backward, irrational. By studying Orientalism, you can actually understand that the roots of Islamophobia are in Orientalism, because Muslims have been already represented. There is already a knowledge created about them. So it becomes easy for them to make the fashion of Islamophobia very viral. When it's already there, of course, it becomes easy. Otherwise, starting a new trend takes time. Also, Islamophobia, if you see since 9/11, has been mediated by, there's like now war on terror, but anti-Muslim racism in Western contexts, I'm saying that has an enduring legacy from the historical power relations and imbalances. But one very important thing that Edward Said talks about is the power and knowledge. Knowledge is a very subjective thing. It's usually created and disseminated by the one who's in power. So for West, because it was a superpower, it was easy for it to create that knowledge and then disseminate it in the audience. And because there's social media now, so you get the billions of views in a few seconds. So Islamophobia is actually contemporary Orientalism with a new terminology, because they both tend to homogenize and essentialize the diverse cultures and people of the Muslim world. When I started studying this course on Middle East, our professor asked us, so what comes to your mind when you talk about Middle East? When you think about Middle East, I was like, conflict. Of course, I didn't say camels because then I was as Western as everybody else, but I said, of course, conflict, war, problems, Islamic issues, political Islam, different kind of sects of Islam.
Sectarian war.
Sectarian issues. So, but when I left the course, when I finished it, I was like, no, it's pretty diverse. Every country is different. Every country interprets Islam in a different way. Every country has a different mazhab, and it's completely fine. And every country has a different culture, a different history. So you cannot homogenize the whole of Middle East. I mean, I first had the problem with the term Middle East first, because where did it come from? So there's a need to deconstruct all of these terms, but I think to make our life easier, we just follow it. Western superiority and dominance, or Islam and Muslims, are central to both of these concepts. Both have led to harmful policies and practices towards Muslims, including discrimination, marginalization, and violence. How long do I have? How many minutes?
Continue.
Okay. Okay, war on terror is a new Islamophobia. It didn't just start after 9/11. They need to launch an operation to create peace in the world by aligning with, superpowers allied with a lot of countries around the world to fight against terror. But who are these terror? Who are people who are stereotyped in this terrorism context? Of course, Muslims. So the war on terror was nothing, but it was Islamophobia with a new name. The use of terms like war on terror has further contributed to the framing of Muslims as enemy, leading to policies such as racial profiling, travel bans, increased surveillance of Muslim communities. I'm sure any of us, whenever we go to the Western countries, everybody passes through the immigration or passport control. Muslims are stopped, especially if you're going with a hijab or if you have a little bit of beard. You're stopped for frisking, for questioning. It's out of context questioning. And it has increased since 9/11. Islamophobia has also been used to justify military interventions and wars in Muslim majority countries. Like if we look at the Iraqi war, the war in Afghanistan, it has a lot to do with Syrian conflict. Of course, we do look at it as like a sectarian conflict, but where does it get its funds from? Like who are the sponsors? So I feel like war on terror was a license for justifying Islamophobia. The media has also played a huge role in perpetuating negative stereotypes and prejudices towards Muslims, portraying them as a monolithic and dangerous group. Even if they don't say it, they show the graphics in a way that you can get it. Like I talked about, that it has been used to justify the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And we all know that even though West promises to outsource democracy in the Middle East, but what they have outsourced is all military or military interventions or arms. I don't know if you have watched this movie. It's called My Name is Khan, and he's Shah Rukh Khan. He's pretty popular in India. He's one of the top actors in Bollywood movies. He actually acted in this movie called My Name is Khan and I'm Not a Terrorist. It's based on a true story where he actually went to US and they saw his last name. So they kept him questioning for hours and hours altogether, just for his last name. So even in this movie, he's jailed because after 9/11, a lot of people were killed. So they were like, any Muslim is responsible for this. So I think this movie is pretty important to watch, even though it was hugely criticized in the West. This is a book, actually, Siga is one of the contributors in this book. It's called Terror Trap. If you want this, like we have them on the table. Not that I'm promoting it, but I actually used it for my research. I wasn't paid for it. It talks about basically how 9/11 was used and how actually the war on terror was used to create the terror trap to justify the West's oppression towards Muslims. It also has a lot of recommendations, so maybe you would like to check it. It talks a lot about 9/11 attacks and how West created these strategies to use war on terror as a means to justify their military interventions in the world, also justify their surveillance, like Muslims were actually created as a threat. This is my conclusion. So I feel like to combat Islamophobia first, it's necessary that we de-orientalize the Muslim world, actually the whole world. We create the new words, new terminology, because sometimes we don't even know, but we are talking like Orientalists as well, because we just follow the trend, but we need to de-orientalize the whole academia. So it's necessary to challenge and deconstruct Orientalist thought through a multidisciplinary approach. Like Orientalism and Islamophobia should be studied together. It's important. They're not necessarily two different concepts. They can be interlinked. Yeah. Okay. So critical race theory can be used. It also talks, critical race theory talks about that racism is a social construct and West is used
using it to satisfy its imperial and colonial interests. Media studies, of course, we need to create alternative media. We don't need to necessarily follow like Fox, CNN, BBC, anything that is funded by West to promote Islamophobia. Also, we need to promote social justice by valuing diversity and understanding the complexities of the world. Every country is not same. Every culture is not same. Not everybody understands Islam in the same way. Even two people, like me and my friend, doesn't understand, because Islam is, and Quran is subject to interpretation, because we live in different worlds. Not that we can challenge some of the basic commandments of God, but interpretation is different. We do understand things differently because God has created us in a different way. So not everything can be homogenized. The Muslim all over the world need to start representing themselves, be it in academics, media, or social sciences. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Saima RASHID, for your next presentation. Now, our speaker is Ms. Arsya Amarlayli NURBIANTI. She will talk about tracing the links between Islamophobia and neoliberalism. That very interesting.
First, please allow me to deliver my speech over here, because it's more comfortable to take 1 or 2 steps along with the talker. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, Islamophobia. If you heard this word, what comes into your mind instantly? Probably you would remember about hijab restriction in France. Or perhaps you would be remembered about some unwillingly stigma which given to Muslims, such as extremist or radical. For me, if I heard the word Islamophobia, I would instantly recall a name, portrays. The murder of 3 young Muslims in Chapel Hill, United States. Long story short, after the investigation was run to identify what the motive of those men committed the crime, the answer is his extreme fear, his extreme hatred toward Islam. Hatred against Islam killed Dia, Yusur, and Razan. Unfortunately, it wasn't stopped there. In 2017, there was a mass shooting case that took place in 2 mosques in New Zealand. Unfortunately, this case was happened when there were people prayed their Friday prayer. And this incident killed up to 50 people. Once again, hatred toward Islam killed so many innocent lives. Even until January 2022, so many cases was reported related to discrimination against Muslims. All over the world, Asia, Australia, Europe, even North America. And this case was come in so many phases: verbal and physical assault, hate speech, online hate, even some incident which involving police officers. In this picture, I illustrate Islamophobia was like a burning flames. Probably we have been familiar with the phrase fire triangle. Those are things which ignites fire in maintaining the burning flames, namely oxygen, heat, and fuel. So this happened with Islamophobia. Wherever it is, how small or big it is, it must be reasons behind it. So what is the reason? What is the cause of Islamophobia to happen? Regarding this issue, there were so many statements stated. An opinion states that Islamophobia happened due to Orientalism study. Another opinion states that Islamophobia happened because of impartial media with provoking hatred against Islam. Well, another opinion states that Islamophobia related to neoliberalism. So, which one is correct? Or all of them was related to one another in causing Islamophobia? So, to answer this question, please allow me to deliver my presentation dealing with tracing the links between Islamophobia and neoliberalism. First, we must analyze what Islamophobia is. If we see it through, Islamophobia comes with two keywords, Islam and phobia. Islam refers to a religion which passed by Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to His Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And phobia, what is phobia? Phobia is an extreme fear against something. All this time, we may assume there are no basic reasons for phobia to happen, but from a book entitled Manufacturing Phobia, there are actually three reasons why phobia might happen. The first one is genetic, so phobia could be passed by parents to their kids. The second reason is culture. It means people's perception about something in a community could create phobia into one person or another. And the third reason is behavioral. It means someone's really bad experience about something in the past could lead to phobia in the future for them. So, if phobia determined this way, Islamophobia could determine as an extreme hatred, extreme fear against Islam that could be ignited by genetics or culture, as well as through behavioral. For the next discussion, I would like to refer Islamophobia as a fear against Islam, which created by people's perception about something in the cultural sector. So what is the root cause of Islamophobia? There was a contemporary sociologist named James Carr who writes a journal entitled Islamophobia, Neoliberalism, and Muslim Other, and also he wrote another important book entitled Experiences of Islamophobia. In his book and journal, James Carr stated that neoliberalism plays a role in the growth of Islamophobia. Why is that? Let's talk further about it. First, we need to know what is neoliberalism. According to David Harvey, neoliberalism is an ideology which emphasizes individual independence and freedom to make decisions in the free market, free trade, and also respect to personal belonging system. Neoliberalism could also be defined as a political project. From this determination, we could say that neoliberalism is a political ideology which demands personal freedom in making decisions. So what is the relation and what is the links between Islamophobia and neoliberalism? This is the scheme from James Carr's explanation in his book. He stated that after his research, he said Islam is a threat to neoliberalism. Yeah, you didn't misheard that. Islam bin as-Salam was seen as a big threat to neoliberalism. Why? At least there are two reasons for it. The first one is neoliberalism is a globally hegemony ideology which requires to be followed by everyone. And the second reason is neoliberal's value is contradictory to Islamic teaching. So, in the point of view of neoliberals, Islam was seen as a threat. This is the scheme of James Carr's explanation in his book about the relation between neoliberalism and Islamophobia. It seems pretty complex, right? Let me explain. Neoliberalism is an ideology which has an orientation to get power and money. To perpetuate their power, they conduct to do expansion in economic, business, and cultural sectors. And to perpetuate their purposes, the action they take are demanding banks and a business in the country to be open for control from abroad. In cultural sectors, they tend to make a new standard of culture as well as create the stigma that people who do not follow neoliberal ideas are uneducated people. To make their proposals more easy to get, neoliberals make a stigma, make a dichotomy of Muslim, and they divided Muslim into good Muslim and bad Muslim. Neoliberals only embrace the good Muslim, and to bad Muslim, they put some stigmas, they put some labels which triggered Islamophobia to happen. This action by neoliberals to create a stigma about good Muslim and bad Muslim was called civilizing mission. Civilizing mission. And this civilizing mission is performed through various methods such as political power, through military, and as well as through educational sectors. After finding out more about Jamskar, now we know what is the relation between Islamophobia and neoliberalism. Well, this opinion wasn't just stated by Jamskar alone. It is also stated by some researchers. The first one is Amarlayli and Titler. In their journal, in their research, they stated that racism in the world is contradictory to neoliberals' ideology. So, neoliberals plays a role in the increasing issue of racism in the world. This supports the argument of Jamskar research that said racism against Islam is possible to be related to neoliberalism. The other researchers is Ahmad Kabel. In his journal, he stated that neoliberalism and Islamophobia is related, especially in educational sectors. So, that stereotype about Islam is a bad religion is given to children, resulting fear against Islam. We already discussed about the statement from Amarlayli and Titler and also Ahmad Kabel. There are another researchers that stated that Islamophobia and neoliberalism are related. He is Rashan Waikar. In his journal, he stated that nowadays, Western countries are trying to make other countries to have the same value as them, as the value they meant is neoliberalism. Well, Islamophobia and neoliberalism was related into one another, was stated by Jamskar and another researchers. On the other hand, Islamophobia also connected with some important issues which are inseparable and become part of Islamophobia perpetuation. What are the connections? The first one is Orientalism study. Edward Said in his book stated that when Orientalists trying to picture Islam, they use a dichotomy with Arab and bad Arab. Good Arab is the term that used to describe Muslims who wants to obey what Western people say. Meanwhile, bad Arab was labeled for those Muslims who do not want to obey what Western people say. This supports the argument of Jamskar that there are dichotomy of Muslim, good Muslim and bad Muslim. The other things that plays a role in the Islamophobia perpetuation is commercialization of Islamophobia. It is depicted in Nathan Lynn's book entitled Islamophobia Industry. He stated that there are a lot of parties use and sell hatred against Islam in order to get money. And the commercialization happened in website as being displayed in jihadwatch.org.
Sorry to interrupt you. 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. In a year, they could earn up to $2 million by uploading writing that provoke hatred against Islam. And this kind of commercialization also happened in some news channel as well as newspaper. Now let's get back to the early illustration. If Islamophobia is like a burning flames of hate, from this presentation, I would like to conclude that Islamophobia is really designed by neoliberals. And Islamophobia also connected with Orientalism study and media provocation that make people hate Islam. To close this presentation, I would like to say that our Prophet Muhammad SAW stated that, like a parable, a Muslim is like a body. If one of them is sick, the other would also feel that. Probably discrimination related to Islamophobia is not really felt by our own skin, but this issue has already taken so many lives of our brothers and Muslim sisters. And this Islamophobia issue is very detrimental to Muslims everywhere. It requires our consent as Muslim brothers and sisters to take action to stop this Islamophobia immediately. This issue is not just a topic to talk about, but we have a serious problem to solve. I hope this seminar could be a head start moment for all of us to work together how we could solve this Islamophobia problem together. So this seminar is not just a meeting and presentation without any meaning at all. Maybe that's all from me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Arsya, Amarlayli, NURBIANTI for your nice presentation. And our last speaker is Dr. Hassan Mahmoud. He will talk about Islam and racialized national identity politics in Muslim majority country. So, sir, the floor is yours.